Good morning and welcome to Data and More. And we're so happy to be returning to an in-person format. We're very pleased to have Tom Zissis here to lead us through the data today. And we're pleased to have Tamim here from Serco to give us an update on the Simcoe County Service System Manager. But today I'd like to just give you a short update on some of the projects and the workforce size of our organization has completed this year. So we were at the Skilled Trade Expo last May 15th at the Elmvale Community Center, where we had over 20 employers offering hands-on activities related to apprenticeship in the skilled trades. 2,000 grade 8 students and 200 adults came to the evening presentation, which was more of an employment event. We participated in the annual Employers Conference, which was held out at Snow Valley. We had over 100 employers at that event. We created 2 employer pieces this year. One is a YouTube video on employer funding, and the next is a podcast in training in languages other than English. And so if you look on your table, you'll have an agenda, and on that agenda, there is a QR code. And if you scan that QR code, it will take you to the page on our website where you can find both the podcast and the YouTube video. Simcoe Muskoka Skillforce also partnered with Muskoka Ventures and the Muskoka Workforce Committee to create a video focusing on opportunities in tourism in Muskoka. And we're proud to work with employers, municipal economic development, local not-for-profit organizations, chambers of commerce, BIAs, school boards, and literacy organizations from across Simcoe and Muskoka. Just for those of you who don't know, in the next few weeks, we will be moving to our new location from our longtime location at Alliance Boulevard. We will be moving to Orillia City Hall. So if you're in the neighborhood after April 1st, please come up and visit us. We're on the 2nd floor. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Tamim Hamidi from Serco, and he's going to do an update on the SSM.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Tamim Hamidi, as mentioned, and I'm the Community Outreach Manager with Serco Canada. And today I'm just here to share some program information and some updates with you guys in terms of what we are currently doing and what we are currently involved in. So before I start, I want to thank Sherry for giving me this opportunity to share some updates, because usually when I'm speaking to community partners or providers, I'm usually talking about our community partner portal. So it's really great that I have this opportunity to share with you what we're doing as a team. So I'm very excited to share some information with you guys. Okay. So this is just kind of a refresher for me, for you guys. I just wanted to put the slide here because most of you, I think, already know about the integrated employment service model. So as you guys might know, in 2019, the ministry announced that they're going to change employment services to integrated employment services. And the vision behind this transformation was to create a locally responsive, outcome-based employment services system that meets the diverse needs of employers and job seekers across full spectrum of employment readiness. The transformation was broken down into 5 categories, which is timely support. So under this new model, we have to support clients, diverse clientele, and to ensure that they get the right service and supports when they need them. Skill alignment, employers find the right workers with the right skill sets. Client success, clients find and keep good jobs. Decrease on social assistance and OW, as well as ODSP. So what we want to do under this new model is to work with clients and get them full-time jobs and reduce less reliance on OW or ODSP offices. And of course, a results oriented, sustainable, efficient, and performance-based system. So accountability for results. So I just wanted to share this with you. I think most of you already do know about the transformation from the employment service to the integrated employment services, but just as a refresher, I wanted to share this with you. This is our catchment. Most of the time, people ask me which catchment we cover. So when I say Kitchener, Waterloo, and Barrie, we actually go from Cambridge all the way up to Midland, right? All the green dots that you do see, those are our service providers like Agilic, Georgian College, YMCA, all of those. Within our catchment, we have about 9 community colleges and universities that I work with on regular basis. And some stats that I have here for you. The total population within our catchment is just close to 860,000. The working age is 15 to 64. About 200, close to 250,000 youth between the ages of 15 to 29. The demographic groups, Francophone is 1.9, Indigenous is 2.9. NEET, for some of you who don't know what NEET is, it's not in education, employment, or training. So that's the highest actually, and newcomer. So this is basically gives you an overview of our catchment area and the demographic that we're serving. Okay, so Circle is the SSM for Northwest Ontario. This was part of the Phase 3 announcement that just we started actually delivering integrated employment services as of yesterday. So how this started our journey in 2019, the province did announce that they're going to change employment services to the integrated employment services, and they did this in a prototype launch approach. So the prototype launch was in 2021, and phase one was launched in April of 2022, where we were awarded the Kingston Pembroke to as the SSM for Kingston Pembroke. Then phase two launched January of 2023, which we were awarded the Kitchener-Waterloo Berry, and phase three, which we started yesterday, was the Northwest catchment area. So the light blue dots that you see on the map are our catchment areas. The dark blue are the other SSMs that are managing service providers in those areas. Employ Next and Aboriginal Labor Force Development Circle. So a lot of people don't know about our recent partnership with the ALFDC. So basically, ALFDC provides employment and training programs and services through 8 local delivery mechanisms and 12 First Nations located throughout Ontario. The LDMs were established during the Indigenous Training Program's Federal Aboriginal Employment Strategy, and as a result of this, ALFDC has developed considerable expertise in the delivery of employment and training programs to Indigenous people over the past several years. ALFDC has representation on the Ontario Indigenous Skills and Employment Training ISETs as well as National ISETs Board. ALFDC collaborates with other Indigenous employment and training organizations servicing both on and off First Nations clients. So the question that I get asked, what is this partnership? So this partnership is all about working with ALFDC to support Indigenous clients that we have, right? So the first thing is working together. We want to work with them to support the Indigenous community as much as we can. We want to enhance referrals, so strengthening and improving referral pathways between ALFDC and our service providers. And one of the approaches that we have that we are going to do is starting April, we're going to start doing site visits to our service providers, and we're going to start providing more information to them in terms of referrals and give them the opportunity to learn more about what ALFDC has to offer. Culturally relevant trainings. So ALFDC also wants to hear from our service providers in terms of what services they have that they're offering to Indigenous community. So if they want to offer any feedback or support or suggestions, we're going to support our service providers in doing that as well. Community resources. So we have developed a community guide. So let's say we make a referral to ALFDC and the client's first priority is not a job and it's housing. So ALFDC has this community resource guide where they will actually work with the client to get them the support that they need, right, from the Indigenous community. And leadership, of course, right? So within this partnership, we do have an advisory circle where we meet on a quarterly basis and we talk about what services are available within the community to service Indigenous job seekers. So aside from the partnership, we have this table that ALFDC is chairing, and we have community organizations. Some of you might have heard of NEPAM. They work with Indigenous youth 15 to 29, and they support them with employment and training. So they're also a part of this table. And basically, we're just sitting together and talking about what services are there that we can support the job seeker and how we could come together as a community to support the Indigenous job seekers. Uh, Employ Next Center of Excellence. So basically, what's our Center of Excellence? So the Employ Next Center of Excellence collaborates with the employment ecosystem to understand best practices and pain points, analyze outcomes, data, and engage with end users, defining opportunities for continuous improvement and enhancing service delivery. So just to summarize the Center of Excellence objective, we regularly connect with community partners, our service providers, experts on the field, and we gather information and we bring it to our Center of Excellence to see how we can best support the community. A great example of this was, and how we bring this information is through the advisory tables and working groups that we do chair. A good example I can give you is that last year, October, we hosted our employer advisory table, and we brought employers from all industries, and we asked them what are some of the challenges that you are facing, and they mentioned that a lot of time it's the retention and soft skills. So I was fortunate enough to connect with Shari because I know they have a program called Soft Skills Solution, which was a fantastic program. And they came in our recent employer advisory table and did a presentation, and it was very well received. So again, the whole point of the Center of Excellence is that we communicate, we connect with community partners to see what are some of the challenges and how can we work to ensure we enhance service delivery and work with our community to support them. Employer engagement framework. So this is something that's on everybody's mind right now, especially with the tariffs and with what's happening right now. Um, and some of the things, this is something big that we are actually currently working on. Employer needs assessment. So what we're actually doing is connecting with employers to capture information in terms of if they've worked with service providers or have they not worked with service providers. If they have, we want to hear from their experience. If they have not, we want to talk to them about what are the benefits of working with service providers. I recently completed, I called 20 employers to complete a survey because, as you guys know, the tariffs is coming and everybody's mind is just on the tariffs. And I was just talking to the employers to kind of get a sense of what's going on. How are you guys feeling about that, right? Um, Service provider employer survey. We also developed a questionnaire that we sent to our service providers to fill out to identify what services they're offering to the employers, right? So it could be job development services, it could be job fairs or any community events that they're offering. So we just wanted to get a sense of what our service providers are offering to the employers, right? Um, and employer engagement, of course, right? So about 2 weeks ago, I was at an event and I met with the president of Ontario Chamber of Commerce, Daniel. And one of the questions that I personally asked him, I said that, if the tariffs do come along, what is the chamber doing, right? So he mentioned that, they're meeting with the province to kind of put a list of recommendations to put forward to ask the province to support the employers, right? And one of the things was incentivize, right? So to create an incentive for employers, right? So which was something very interesting. I am regularly, and my team is regularly out in the community, connecting with, going to Chamber of Commerce meetings and attending their events, the BA5 that they have, hosting employer events within the catchment. We are regularly attending job fairs, community events, and also hosting employer advisory table through the Center of Excellence, as I mentioned earlier. So that's it for myself. To conclude, I do want to mention that with this tariffs coming around, because I know literally everybody's thinking about that and talking about it. I was just thinking about this on my way here, actually. If you know of employers who are also laying off people, feel free to connect with myself because there are a lot of employers that are struggling right now at the moment, right? And anything we can do to support, especially employers who are laying off people. I just found out about this new program called work sharing. It's with the federal government. And I'm actually hosting them on March 12th to provide information session to our service providers, which is basically if they lay off their staff, the one day will be paid by the federal government. It's a great program that I just recently found out. So there's a lot of services available to support our local employers. So if there's anything that you might know of that in employers who are laying off people or letting go of people, feel free to connect with myself and I'll be happy to connect you with our service providers within our catchment areas.
I'm going to give some uh, historic context in terms of what have been the trends in terms of client numbers. Uh, and it's not only, so we're going to do a fair bit on employment services, but also going to touch on some of the other categories. And then when we go into, so just the global numbers, and then look at some individual programs. Okay. So first of all, so as you know, so under the employment services old system, we had two categories of clients. So assisted clients who had higher level of services, and unassisted who typically got some referral services and could use some self-serve services either online or in the employment resource centers. So those are and we have data for those two categories. Under the SSM system, under the Service System Manager model, we have three categories of clients, the A, B, and C. The C kind of matches the assisted client, and B to some extent, and the A client would be the unassisted, but we don't get numbers that tell us what those categories, at least we don't get the numbers as the what's provided from the province in terms of the three categories. So we have to group all of the SSM client numbers together. And what we're showing there goes back to prior to when the SSM started. So a couple of points here, and you don't have to kind of look at the numbers too closely because I'm going to show a graph that shows and can illustrate what the trends have been. But essentially the numbers, of course, as we all know, really dropped when COVID hit. Number one, centers were closed for a while, then they were able to operate under certain conditions online with restrictions, but at the same time, employers were closed, so there weren't as many people seeking services. But after the lockdowns were removed, the numbers didn't recover all that much. So perhaps the best way to illustrate it is through the graph. Okay, so blue line are all the clients, whether it's under employment services or under the SSM. And so you can see in 2021 how that number dropped, the blue line, kind of recovered somewhat, but really plateaued, never ever got back to where it had been before COVID. The orange line is just to show what the number of unemployed people were on an annual basis, and to show how that number really increased when COVID hit, but went down again, of course, afterwards, but started rising in 2023, 2024. So the main big story is in employment services, and I'm going to show in most programs how numbers never really recovered. Now, as Tamim mentioned, the SSM puts an emphasis on one category in particular, on Ontario Works clients, right? They really want to ensure there's a higher proportion of Ontario Works clients, but also ODSP to some extent. So what I've got here are the Ontario numbers for the last 3 years, comparing the old employment services. I'm not using SSM here, I'm using the integrated employment services, but that's the new model, just to show the percentages of clients by different income categories. But you can see each year, so Ontario Works is that orange line, how in any given year, the proportion of Ontario Works clients is either 2 or 3 times higher than what it is in the same year for employment services, the old model. Okay. ODSP is a smaller proportion of clients, whether it's under the old system or the new system, also has increased, but not in the same magnitude. The other thing I'm just going to mention about the Ontario Works, what's interesting is that even under the old system, the number starts increasing. And I don't know whether that's already agencies in areas where the SSM hasn't been brought in yet, whether they already started recruiting or paying more attention to Ontario Works, like kind of getting ready for the changeover. So you see like it went from 12% in 2021, 2022 on Ontario Works under the old system to 14% to 18%, whereas the figures for the SSMs kind of stay in the same range. The only other one I'm going to highlight here is employment insurance numbers. Where maybe because there were a lower proportion of Ontario Works clients under the old system, they tended to be, there were a higher proportion, increased in 2022, 2023 because of COVID, you had many more people who did qualify for EI, and then if they were unemployed and sought services, now that proportion increased, but then it declined back to historic levels, particularly in 2023, 2024. Sorry, I got it mixed up here. Sorry. So the EI numbers went up in 2020, 21. I need three hands. Okay, now this looks really messy, and again, I'm going to have a graph so I can illustrate it for you. But and this data is all available in the report, by the way, so you're going to have it. But again, it shows for programs what the numbers have been for the board area, so Simcoe and Muskoka, for the region, which is the central region, so Simcoe, Muskoka, York, Durham, Toronto, Peel, Halton. For four programs, and of course for the Ontario levels, for four programs, so employment services, assisted claims, literacy and basic skills. And I chose the new in-person numbers to be able to make comparisons. Better Jobs Ontario, the program previously known as Second Career, and then apprenticeship registrations. But simply, if you kind of just eyeball it, you've seen in 2021, from 2020 to 2021, numbers always dropped. You go, whatever role you're in, whatever program you're in, the numbers dropped. And in many respects, the numbers didn't return. So to illustrate it, because it's easier to see visually, those same numbers, and this is just for Simcoe and Muskoka for the board area. The employment services assisted number is that black line. Okay, more technology. That black line goes down in 2020, 2021, and increase, like stays flat for the following year, increases a bit, goes down again. Let's take Better Jobs. Now, Better Jobs, as you saw, was a very small number. It's only around 100 folks. But what I do is I take each number, the number that existed in 2017, 2018, I give it a value of 100. And every year's report after that, I express it in terms of that first year. So it's kind of like a percentage comparison, so that because the number of clients in each of these programs is so different, to try and show the comparative change in each program, I use this kind of ratio. So just focusing again on Better Jobs Ontario is a green line. That one kind of stayed in a more normal range. But again, we're only talking, in this case, we are only talking about 80 to 110 clients in any given year. The LBS new learners, that one, like everyone else, declined a lot in COVID year when COVID hit, recovered and kept on recovering, and in the last year has gone up again considerably, and that's the case both at the board level, I think at the region level, and Ontario. And I'm told, I don't know whether there was more funding or there was a new program. Is someone from literacy and basic skills, what's the explanation for the numbers going up? Anyone? You see? Okay, well, which means those numbers are going to continue to go up. Okay. And oops. Oh boy. Okay. And then for the new apprentices, numbers were climbing, went down again because of COVID again, because you can't do an apprenticeship if the employer is shuttered. But then started rising again, but kind of went down to historic levels to what they were in 2017, 2018 in the last year. But overall, you can see that the general trend has been a slow recovery, even a couple of years after COVID, and sometimes never really reaching back to where it had been. All right. So now I'm going to dig deeper into some of the different programs. We're going to go into the employment services numbers. So let's look first of all at age. Now again, Muskoka, of course, was part of the Muskoka Kawarthas SSM, was one of the initial pilot projects or prototype projects. So they started earlier. So they shifted their numbers that we have in 2023, 2024. They've already been operating for some time. The Simcoe numbers, we're showing two categories. We still have the employment services, but we also have now numbers for Simcoe, the Simcoe SSM. And I compare for each category by age what the census is telling us of the unemployed population. What are the proportions by age? Okay, so you have a benchmark that includes Simcoe, Muskoka, and Ontario. Okay, so let's look at youth. So in Simcoe in 2021, and this shows like these numbers don't change very much. The unemployment rate may change, but the proportion of people who are unemployed by age doesn't change much from year to year. Okay, trust me. So Simcoe, around 26% of people of young people made up the unemployment rate. So 26% of people who are unemployed were 15 to 24 years old. But in Simcoe, they only represent around 17% of the ES clients and around 19% of the SSM clients. So and this is a gap, and this is not to single out Simcoe, it's a gap that exists in just about every area that I've ever looked at, that the youth are not participating, are not making use of employment services in the same proportion of their share of the unemployed. It's probably gone up, sorry, it's probably gone down since we've stopped having youth dedicated services. So I think that change happened around 2008. Many of you weren't here for that. I'm sure. And also youth are more likely to use online ways of looking for work, right? So, but it's noteworthy that there's quite a gap. Muskoka has a older population and a smaller proportion of youth. So they have around 17% of their unemployed are youth, but also a smaller proportion who are clients in the SSM. The employment services make up these differences in the 25 to 44-year-old range. You know, in all these areas, they make up, you know, between 32 and 37% of the unemployed, but they make up, you know, between 41 and 48% of clients, right? So that's where the demographic shift happens in terms of the clients. And then the figures for 45 to 64-year-olds, also, you know, it's close. It's not as much of a difference. And for over 65, interestingly, you still have a higher portion of people who are over 65, both working and also among the unemployed set, but they make up a smaller portion of people seeking employment services. Okay, let's look at gender. And this one we can do fairly quickly. Essentially, in Ontario, oh man, how did I do this? Okay, sorry, too many buttons. So in Ontario, slightly more than half of the unemployed are females, but it's very close, like 52 to 47. But it flips in Simcoe and Muskoka. You know, one of the reasons for that is I've noticed, like in the Greater Toronto area, there's a higher proportion of female unemployed. Right. Among the clients, there's a higher proportion, definitely a much higher proportion of males. But again, the numbers aren't that huge. But certainly, it's interesting that there is a slight difference between the Simcoe Employment Services and the Simcoe SSM. The Muskoka figures are just about even. We don't have, for the census data, we don't have figures for trans or undisclosed or other categories, okay? In terms of source of income, so we already looked at the changes in the system at the provincial level. Here we have it for Simcoe and Muskoka for the employment, either employment services or for the IES clients. And the one I'm going to again emphasize, going back to Ontario Works. So the IES clients, around 15% of clients in the old system are OW recipients, but twice that number proportion among the Simcoe SSM. Muskoka not as high for some reason, whereas Muskoka has a slightly higher proportion of people on ODSP in the IES system. And in both instances, they're around 1.5 or twice the amount they have under the old system. I don't think there's anything else really of great import here. The all the other figures are fairly close. The employment insurance proportions are low. Self-employed is low. Okay. The real story when making comparisons here on source of income, it's essentially the changes in Ontario Works clients. Okay, distribution by education. Again, we can compare the figures to the proportions in the census of people who are unemployed. So there's a fair amount of consistency here. Among people with no certificate, you can see for ES clients, it's around 12%, 14% under the SSM, 16%. It's a bit higher in Muskoka because Muskoka has a slightly higher proportion of unemployed who have no certificate compared to Simcoe. High school numbers, see the range is not too far off. Certainly there's always fewer clients under employment services who have an apprenticeship certificate compared to their share of the unemployed. College is in the same range. Where you start seeing a bit more of a difference is unusually among those with a bachelor degree. They make up a smaller proportion of the unemployed in Simcoe and Muskoka, around 8%, but a higher proportion of those who are clients of ES services. Muskoka figures are close, but in Simcoe, they tend to be higher, and certainly among those above a bachelor degree, they make up a higher proportion. Okay, so there are all these different disconnects between the proportions of who's unemployed and who makes up the client base under both systems. Okay, I want to talk a bit about long-term unemployment because it's important in terms of the client numbers, especially under the SSM system. One of the focuses is on individuals who are at risk of long-term unemployment, right? That C category is high risk of long-term unemployment. So I go back a long time because I think it's important to provide a context. So these are the annual rates for long-term unemployment. And by long-term unemployment for this data, we're talking about those who have been unemployed for 6 months or more, okay? Among the unemployed. So the last time, before COVID, the last time we had a recession was, oh man. The last time we had a recession was in 2008. So that's when the long-term unemployment really started increasing. So that by around 2011, around a quarter of people who were unemployed for 6 months or more. Okay, prior to that, it was like around 14%. After the recession, first of all, took a long time in kind of working its way out of our economy. So the long-term unemployment really went down very, very slowly and didn't get back to where it had been before the recession until 10 years, 10 or 12 years after the recession hit. It was a really long time. Partly because when a recession hits, businesses often also change some of their behaviors. And so it became harder to place people. They were cutting back on staffing. And so those who had been unemployed for a longer period of time were at a disadvantage in terms of finding work. So they stayed unemployed for a longer period of time. Okay, so COVID hits and bang, we actually had a higher proportion of long-term unemployed by 2021 than we did after the recession in 2008. Okay, so that's really significant. But it's a different kind of recession. It wasn't a recession that was because of a business cycle. It was a recession because we had to shut down businesses for health reasons. So as a result, that rate fell quickly, much faster than what it did after the 2008 recession. But, it's going up again, okay? And that's, I think, a real worry. It's going to have clearly consequences for employment services. You're going to see more people who've been unemployed for a longer period of time who are going to have a hard time being considered by an employer. And just to show the monthly data, so this goes back now to January 2023. So this is the Ontario monthly data. And I said before, it's gone up, and you can see that the trend line has been not good. But wait until the tariffs hit. Okay, so the distribution by length of time of the unemployed. Okay, here's the labor force survey data that shows for those who are unemployed for 6 to 12 months, they make up 13%. Over 12 months, they make up 5%. So essentially 18% of the unemployed in 2023 were unemployed for 6 months or more. But as you know, your clients have been unemployed. You get clients who have been unemployed for a longer period of time. Okay? And so those numbers are pretty high. In fact, around a third of your clients, whether it's in Simcoe or in the region, and I'm only showing the Simcoe numbers because we don't have these numbers from the SSM. Around a third of the clients are unemployed. Now, when I say we don't have the numbers from the SSM, I should say we don't have the numbers from the province. I'm going to say, because I'm allowed to do this, it's really a shame the province doesn't share the same numbers. We had far more data under the old employment services system, which we still get, but in the switch over to the SSM, we don't get that data anymore. We used to get data on what jobs they've been laid off from, where they're being placed. We get hardly any outcome data. So we're not able to really analyze and learn about what's working and what's not working. but I'm preaching to the converted here. Okay, outcome data, comparing 2022 and 23 to the most recent year. The outcomes have all gone down slightly. They've been increasing slowly over the years, but it is striking that in this last year we have not as high, small percentages, but still this is not a good trend. We have fewer people being placed in employment, slightly more who are still unemployed, slightly more that we don't have we don't know what happened to them. So that's not a good trend. Okay, and then what I'm going to do here, this is a very busy slide, so let me explain it. We know, and this is for all Ontario, we know the distribution of education of EO client, employment services clients. Okay, and I use these colors here for education. I'm showing it in blue, those who have a university degree. So 31% of all clients in Ontario who are employment service assistants have a university degree. 24% have a college. 5% have a college or less than 2%, less than 2-year program apprenticeship. 29% have a high school diploma, and 11% have no certificate. And that's their education on intake. We also know what jobs they're laid off from. And we can break those jobs down by the education level that's typically required for that job. So the clients who come already are coming from jobs that typically even don't require any certificate, right? Like 11% of them have no certificate, but 32% of them are in jobs that don't require a certificate. The high school is kind of close, but as you go down the list, far fewer are in jobs that require a university degree or are in management jobs. We put those in the same categories. Far fewer, with 24% who have a college degree, but only 15% are coming from a job that requires a college degree. Although for the 2-year programs, it is higher. Okay. These are the jobs that are in after employment services. And actually, by and large, it gets worse. Like if I just do for jobs that require a high school diploma or less, 61% end up in jobs that require a high school diploma or less, compared to 40% who have high school diploma or less. And this is not I always have to emphasize, this is not a knock on the services. It's a knock on what you're being provided in terms of being able to support people to move up in their job search. Right now, we're largely only able to kind of match somebody, and an employer is going to say, well, what was your last job? And that's just going to determine much more where they're ending up as opposed to what their education was. Okay, so a few quick numbers on literacy and basic skills. So here I am comparing, again, we looked at the new in-person learners when I showed the numbers before, but now here I'm comparing the new in-person and carryover, okay, for the board, for the region, for Ontario. The number that was present in 2018, 2019, I give it a value of 100, and every number is expressed in relation to that number in each subsequent year. So again, it actually went down even slightly before COVID, but that already may be, even maybe the March numbers were already affecting the fiscal year figures, but certainly in 2020, 2021, the numbers really dropped, just recovered marginally, but really did come back quite a lot in 23, 24. More so at the Ontario level and the region level, also at the board level. So the board numbers of new and carryover are around 90% or 91 or 91% or so of what they were in 2018, 2019. Nowhere have the numbers come back to where they were yet, but the trajectory is good. So we have three categories: community agency, community college, school board. These are the 2022-23 figures. The 23-24 figures, they stay pretty consistent. And essentially, there's more or less an equal division between community college and school board figures, slightly fewer proportion of community agencies compared to the region and Ontario. Yeah, that's kind of the essential story here. You have, so slightly different mix of service provider sectors at the board level compared to the region and Ontario. Education. Now here, I've put up a lot of numbers because what I'm doing is we have the LBS clients and I'm comparing them to the IES clients and the ES clients. So I'm comparing literacy to employment services. So educational attainment. So this is no surprise for LBS clients, a much higher proportion who have no certificate compared to certificate among employment service clients. Slightly less high school, apprenticeships around the same, certainly less college, definitely less bachelor, certainly less above bachelor. We all know why that is. It's just kind of interesting to kind of compare the two side by side. And my source of income, again, looking at the Ontario Works figures, here it's in a low, slightly lower range than what we saw for employment services, but maybe a high proportion, around slightly over a third who are actually employed, and also no source of income is kind of the second highest figure. I think I did compare this. Oh no, sorry. Okay, so anyway, on Learner's Gold Path, the biggest one is seeking employment, and it's gone up from the previous year. Again, at the board level, around a third, almost a third are seeking employment. Then secondary school credit and post-secondary. Whereas in the region and Ontario, the post-secondary and the region and Ontario, the post-secondary is the higher target for clients. Okay, just very quickly for Better Jobs, because we only have 96 clients last year, and it's been in the same range, I just kind of highlight a slight majority are 25 to 34-year-olds, a slight majority are male. Most have either a high school or college diploma. Around 40% have been unemployed for over 12 months, so that's much higher than the employment services figures. And kind of that I find kind of interesting. Around a third in Ontario are enrolled in the transport truck driver program, which is the number is equal to the 10 largest other programs. So, we may want to ask the province to change the name of the program. Okay, apprenticeships. So, again, looking at the apprenticeship numbers, there was quite a big push on to promote apprenticeships, for a whole bunch of good reasons. First of all, shortages of skilled trades, but also some very good jobs, good, well-paying jobs in this sector. So we've got the board, region, and Ontario figures. Again, I'm using the ratio of making a comparison to what the numbers were in 2014, 2015. So I'm going back much further. So we had been seeing the numbers increase, right? So we had this push on from the province to put more emphasis on apprenticeships. Again, like everywhere else, the numbers really dropped because of COVID, but started rebounding really well. The concern I would have is, why the numbers kind of dropped here. The reading numbers keep on rising. What it means is that in Toronto, there's been a greater take up of apprenticeship positions, but it's stalled now at the provincial and region and board level. So, these are just to give you a sense of the top 10 apprenticeship categories that people are choosing to register in. And I've color coded it to kind of show where it's the same one at the board level, region level, or Ontario level, just to show that there's a high level of consistency. Electricians is number one, automotive service, general carpenter, industrial mechanic millwright. But you can see like most of the top 6 or so are more or less the same, sometimes in a slightly different order. We also have more recently, we got this data in September 2024. It shows the breakdown of registered tradespeople by category and by age. So this is we have the Simcoe numbers, and the next slide we'll have the Muskoka numbers. So again, these are the top 10, the top number of, the highest number of registered tradespeople. So in Simcoe, you've got around 3,400 electricians. And by the time you get to number 10, it really drops off. The number, huge. Like most people are in, just 5 or 6 categories, make up around over 80% of all trades, even though I think we have around 140 trades or so. But what I wanted to really point out here is where the proportion of those who are 55 years or older. So like more than half of the truck and coach technicians in Simcoe are 55 years or older. So clearly we're going to have a lot of retirements there, and that figure is not dissimilar from the Ontario figure. So there's nothing unusual about Simcoe in having that number. I don't know why truck and coach is not drawing in as many youth, but it is what it is. The figures for Muskoka are even more severe, 64%. Like almost 2/3 of truck and coach technicians. I mean, I have trouble bending down. I don't know how you would do that when you're, in your 60s. But it also applies, like Muskoka generally has an older age profile. So they also have a high proportion, even of refrigeration and air conditioning system mechanics, electricians, domestic and rural. Like that's kind of it's not a big category. It's only 33 compared to, but it is one of this is the top 10 we're looking at. So I guess the point here is you look at a chart like that, and if you're, giving advice to clients about what kind of choices they might be making in terms of choosing apprenticeships, there are certain ones where we're similar to be seeing the numbers open up. Okay, just very quickly, Ontario Job Grant. So this is a very popular program for employers because they get a subsidy for training. And again, the numbers of people who are being trained under COJG, both at the board, region, and Ontario levels, went down during COVID. We're really going down. And this may well just be because of funding, and have really not recovered. They're less than 60% what they were in 2018, 2019. So just a recap to really kind of highlights. In most programs, there's been a decline in the number of clients, often because of COVID, but not always. We saw some of those numbers decline before, and there's hardly been much recovery. Certainly been a growth in the proportion of OW clients as we expected in employment services. Long-term unemployment has been increasing. I think that's an important takeaway. That jump in the number of clients in LBS. Better Jobs Ontario numbers have been flat. Number of COJG trainees fell, right? So I'm just kind of showing in almost every program. Okay, you deserve a break. So we have a lot of different sources for data now. We have the labor force survey. So that's the thing we always hear about, you know, every month we hear, oh, that employment rate's gone up, gone down. That's a labor force survey. So we have unemployment data, participation rate data. Then around, I don't know, around 2015 or so, StatsCan brought in a job vacancy survey. So we have job vacancy rate data. We also ask what's the wage that's being offered, so we can track some wage data. Then we also are able to use tax filer data, and the tax filer data shows income, and it's broken down by employment income, so we can show how employment income is changing over time. But the other thing about tax filer data is that we have addresses, and as a result, we can see where people are moving each year. So that's where we get the migration data from the tax filer data. And then we are also able to track the number of businesses that are present. And we have a couple of different measures. The StatsCan has a business opening and closing data. And then there's a thing called the Canadian Business Count, which is administered every 6 months. They also use administrative data, so they get HST, GST data, and they combine it with another survey called the Survey of Employment, Payroll, and Hours or something like that. And so they're able to, it almost becomes like a census of how many business establishments there are there. So there's actually a fair amount of data out there right now. So we'll start with the unemployment data. We're going to start with annual data here. So a couple of things. First of all, I tend not to show Ontario figures because the Toronto CMA often operates or has a different dynamic than the rest of Ontario. So I have Toronto CMA, which is the orange line, and rest of Ontario. So Ontario minus Toronto CMA. And then for the local level, the MK is for Muskoka Kawarthas, because that's an economic region. So the economic regions, that's how they determined the boundaries for the SSMs. They took the economic regions that StatsCan uses. And then KWB is Kitchener-Waterloo-Barrie. So for that economic region, so that includes Simcoe, as Tamim's map showed, that area, the catchment area. But we also have data at the census metropolitan area. And so we have actually Barrie data, Barrie CMA. And this is annual. And you can see, of course, again, COVID, huge increase. But it is, I mean, it's important to note that the Toronto CMA had a much higher unemployment rate. Wasn't the case before, but that much higher unemployment rate stayed with the Toronto CMA. Everyone else kind of followed much the same trajectory, except that Muskoka Kawarthas, their unemployment rate went down to 4%, and it stayed down for the last couple of years. Everywhere else, it's been going up again. We have monthly data. Now, I gotta mention, you know, the labor force survey is a survey, so it means they use a sample. And the smaller the sample size, the less reliable the data is. And what StatsCan does, in order to make it a bit more robust, for many areas, instead of showing a monthly figure, they do an average of the previous 3 months. So we have what's called a 3-month moving average. And so this is, in order to get down to these smaller geographies, we're using a 3-month moving average. And this goes back to January 2023 up to January 2025. But we saw the annual rates going up, and here again, the same colors. So that Toronto CMA figure has been going up. Everyone's kind of going up. Even Muskoka Kawarthas has been going up. And it's these lines are really squiggly because I mentioned the sample size. If you have a smaller sample size and that sample changes every month, around a sixth of the sample is changed. Okay, that's how Stats Canada refreshes it. So if you get asked to be part of the labor force survey, they're going to ask you questions for 6 months, and then you're replaced by someone else. But when you get down to the smaller geographies, the figures, like here, Muskoka Kawarthas has the smallest. Well, Barrie also has a smaller population compared to the other areas. You see how these jumps happen? It's not necessarily because the unemployment rate is changing so much. It's because the sample size is smaller. Okay? It's distorted. I almost don't pay attention to the monthly unemployment rate. Like it's always big news, right? Oh, unemployment's up. Oh, unemployment's down. Next month, oh, unemployment's down. Oh, unemployment's up. It's because, oftentimes, it's because of these. Like even in the Toronto CMA, even though it's a larger population, the sample size is part of the issue. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it gives you a reason sometimes just to pause. I'm just letting you, take that little piece away with you to always put the unemployment rate figures on a monthly basis in some perspective. Okay, so participation rate. Participation rate is important because it tells us both how many people are either employed or actively looking for work. So that's what makes up the labor force. And you can see by population, so the participation rate, is for everyone who's 15 years and older, okay? Because it goes back to a time when we had 15-year-olds in the labor market. So I've narrowed the range down so we can close in on the figures. So it's down to 52% to 72%. So first of all, you can see there's quite a substantial difference between different geographies. This is the green is the Muskoka Kawarthas, and it hovers at around 55 to 57%. This blue line is the Barrie CMA. It's not necessarily the case that it reflects the economy, it reflects the demographics. Okay, the participation rate is highly dependent on the age profile of the population. And essentially, Muskoka Kawarthas has many older people. Okay, Barrie, a lot of younger families, right? People moving up there with kids and so on. It's got a younger population. Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie, the red line, even the Toronto CMA. Especially this is also a function of immigration. The Toronto CMA is always going to have a higher participation rate because it has a younger age profile, because it has immigrants coming all the time. Muskoka Kawarthas hardly get, proportionally much smaller number of immigrants. Oh God. Okay. And the only other one I was going to point out, so here's the rest of Ontario. Okay, so the rest of Ontario typically lower than the Toronto CMA, and then even in and around the Toronto CMA, you'll have some areas that are higher. Okay, so these are just kind of things to give you a context for understanding the participation rates. The monthly figures also have that same variation. Oh, one more last thing I'm going to mention. the trend line, certainly more recently, is that the participation rates have been going down. Partly, like when unemployment goes up, the participation rate tends to go down because those who are on the margin are saying, it's harder to find work. I may just drop out. I may go back to school. I may kind of do something else for a while instead of working. But there's kind of a relationship between unemployment rate and participation rate. Okay, so the monthly figures, same thing. Also, there's a certain amount of that variation that I mentioned. That's also still a consequence of the sample size. But the trend line tends to be downward. All right, so that's the story on that. Okay, job vacancy rates. So this measures how many, the StatsCan asks employers about how many job vacancies they have. So this is collected on we have this data on a quarterly basis, so every 3 months. So again, I wanted to show figures before COVID. So we start at Q1 2019 up to Q3 2024. The data tends to lag. It's not as current as the labor force survey data. This gap is COVID. So during COVID, StatsCan said there's no point collecting the data. So we have this period where there's nothing to show. So we have Toronto region. Again, these are economic areas, rest of Ontario, Muskoka, Kawarthas, Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie. And right after COVID, as we know, the job vacancy rates really increased, right? Because everything was stalled for a while and then we were recovering. A number of people partly some people just dropped out of the labor force, but also people had switched positions. So there are certain jobs where there are a much higher proportion of job vacancies. So the job vacancy rates really increased in 2022. And interestingly, Muskoka, Kawarthas increased much more than elsewhere. But since then, we've seen this decline. And again, so this is all consistent, right? Unemployment rates go down, unemployment rates go up, job vacancy rates go down, participation rates go down. They're all kind of linked. You can kind of follow the pattern. Okay, I wanted to zero in on specific categories of jobs. So we're starting here with Muskoka, Kawarthas, and we got number of job vacancies. So it's not the job vacancies were expressed as a percentage, but here I'm showing it for 3 large categories of employment. Health occupations in the red, sales and service occupations in the orange, and trades, transport equipment operators. Okay, so obviously health occupations tend to be in the health industry. Sales and service tend to be in retail sales, accommodation and food services, arts, entertainment, and recreation. And the trades and transport, that tends to be construction, transportation, manufacturing, kind of the blue collar jobs. And so same time periods, same gap. And this is where the sales and service numbers really shot up. I mean, they went up for all categories, but really shot up, as we all know, right? We heard about, especially in restaurant business, retail to some extent, people had decided to move on when those places were shuttered. They started switching careers, and that's where the real crunch was for those employers. But since that time, the figures have eventually come down pretty quickly in proportional terms, have come down more than they did for the trades, transport and equipment. Health continued to rise and has more or less stayed higher in relative terms. Okay, so even those job vacancy figures merit unpacking. The same data for Kitchener-Waterloo Barrie, and to some extent, pretty much the same pattern. The very large spike in the sales and service occupations since come down substantially, kind of lower than where it was before COVID. Trades, transport increased, has also come down. Health increased and more or less stayed high in proportional terms, also dipped a bit. But, different employers are experiencing a tight labor market in different ways, or in the reverse, some are not experiencing as tight a labor market. We're also able to collect data, as I mentioned, about what wage is being offered. So when they're asking for the job vacancy data, they say, okay, for each job vacancy, what wage is there? And so that's all accumulated, and we're able to provide an average figure. But I'm going to mention now, so you look at this, and so the orange is Muskoka-Kawarthas, and the blue are Kitchener-Waterloo Barrie. It's reporting the actual wage that's provided by the employer. And I'm going to point out one small thing here. If you notice, every Q2, the wage goes down. Q2, wage goes down. Q2, well, here it kind of stayed steady. Here it goes down. Q2 goes down. Why is that? Well, because we have summer jobs coming in this, right around, and they get posted around April or May. So all of a sudden, the mix of jobs that are in the job vacancy survey has a much larger proportion of lower paying jobs. So it's not as if everyone's job, wages have gone down. It's just because of the mix. Again, a bit of context about how to understand some of these differences you see in the data. But here's another difference I'm going to point out. We had inflation. So what I did is I took those dotted figures and expressed them in terms of current figures. Like I put it into Q3 2024 dollars. Okay. So these large, like this blue line, this sharper increase is actually not as much of an increase, is it? And similarly, the sharper increase here is kind of flatter, right? The gap between the two is narrowed because you adjust for inflation. Now, I'm going to return to this when we look at the median income data. Well, here we go. All right, so as I mentioned, this is tax filer data. Okay, and we have Simcoe in red and Muskoka tax filers in blue. And this is annual. So going back 2017, 18, 19, we only have it up to 2022 because, of course, we don't have the 2024 figures because you haven't filed your taxes. The 2023 figures are still being, it goes through a process before they're released. So this one lags around more than a year. But again, the trend line looks not bad, right? Increases going up all the time. Partly what happened is during COVID, people who were in really low paying jobs were either lost, the places were shuttered, or they decided to take CERB. So they're not reporting employment income. And so the median employment income, the mid-level of everyone's employment goes up. Okay, so there's variations that happen not because people are being paid more, it's about who's being surveyed. Where's the data coming from? But let's look at inflation. Okay, now what I did is I expressed everything in 2017 dollars. So those increases, again, relatively flat. Here's that bump because of people who are on COVID, not, on CERB, sorry, maybe not participating. They come back into the labor market and the figures go down. But because inflation was so high in 2022, generally the figures went down. So our real median income went down. It happened in the States too. There's reasons why everybody was upset, right? It wasn't just, you're being told your income's going up, but you're feeling your income go down is a reason why, I'd say someone's not telling me the truth here, right? And then we get Trump. All right. Sorry, that was males. Okay, I forgot to point that out. But so we have the figures for females as well. Yeah. Hey. Yeah, the same, right? Same scale. I did it deliberately, right? So it's 20 to 55 and 20 to 55 here on the scale. But yeah, so we talked about people being angry about their wages going down. Yeah, I mean, it's really quite striking, the consistently lower wage, median wage, average wage for women, and it applies in all categories. All right. Okay, so net migration, as I said, we're able to look at tax data. So again, it's always important to put it into context in terms of a range of years. So this is net migration. So it means we're measuring who's coming to Muskoka. Is it Muskoka first? To Simcoe. Who's coming to Simcoe minus who's leaving Simcoe. And the net figure, if it's positive, it means more people are coming than are leaving. And we can do the net data by age categories, which is helpful, right? So Simcoe, over these 5, so because we're comparing one tax year to another tax year, so that's why they're expressed as 2016, 2017. What happened in between those 2 years? And we have 5 sets, 6 sets. I'm not a numbers person. I have trouble counting. So Simcoe, the largest portion of net migrants coming into Simcoe are between 24 and 44 years old. First of all, I guess the first thing to point out is in every category, there's a net increase. Okay, so there's not any decrease in any year in any age group in terms of net migration into Simcoe. And in most years, the trend has been in most categories, it's been increasing, but certainly a significant increase. And, some of this could also be, I think it's likely COVID, right? People realize they can work remotely, so they don't have to be living in Toronto and put up with traffic and the Maple Leafs. Sorry, I'm a Habs fan. I had to say that. But also, yeah, I mean, it's a substantial portion of kind of working age younger adults, which is good. I mean, it's, Simcoe's growing, and it's an attractive place to be. Muskoka has much the same. First of all, there's only one time where they had a net decrease, but instead of the 20 and the 25 to 44-year-olds is also a healthy number, but the larger numbers have tended to be 45 to 65-year-olds. And remember, we're looking at other stuff in terms of the participation rate. Well, the migration figures also reflect that, right? That there's a higher proportion of older people who come to Muskoka as opposed to Simcoe. And the truth is, those who are coming, that older population that comes to Muskoka are often more likely coming for retirement as opposed to coming to work, right? So that's kind of a double whammy. They're still working age, but they've already decided to come to Muskoka because they want to have the good life. We are also able to break down where people are coming from, and there's three categories. One is intra-provincial, which means from inside Ontario. Inter means from somewhere else in Canada, but not from Ontario. And then international, from outside Canada. So these are Simcoe figures. And you could see, by far, like, we're talking about almost, let's say in 2021, 22, around 13,000 net immigrants coming from the rest of the province. But people are leaving. There are people leaving Simcoe to go to other parts of Canada. And then there's a small but growing portion of people who are coming internationally. Like, now you may ask, are these international students? Some, yes. It's mainly immigrants, but if an international student is working and filing taxes, they will be captured by this data. For Muskoka, the pattern is also similar. Most of them are coming from the rest of Ontario, and they also have a net number who are leaving for other parts of Canada, and they have a much smaller number of internationals. Again, this only goes up to 2022. We know the figures increase for 2023 and probably 2024 for this, but we are going to see, of course, a decline in the international students. Okay, now we're going to talk about number of businesses, and that's important from a labor market perspective because we want to know how many employers they are and what categories are they hiring in, how large they are. So we have a couple of measurements. One is called, I said about job openings and job closings. That's the name of the survey, but they measured businesses in different ways. An active business is a business that this month has an employee, at least one employee, and it had an employee last month. Okay, so a business can close temporarily. So it might have no employees and then it will be considered closed, and then it can reopen again. All right. Again, I mentioned that I compare I break out the Ontario figures. So we have Toronto CMA. Oh, and I got to mention, this data is only available in much larger geographies. Okay, so we don't have data, say, for smaller areas, certainly not for Muskoka. And again, I took the number of active businesses in January 2020, gave it a value of 100. So COVID hits and it really drops. So what it means, if it goes down to around, that's 87, that 13% of the businesses stopped being active. They didn't have an employee. Right at the depths of COVID, 13%. And in the rest of in Toronto, so that was the rest of Ontario, in Toronto, the figures actually dropped to around 84%. So around 16% of the businesses were closed at that time. And slow recovery, several months for that recovery to take place. We only get back to the 100 level, at the end of 2021. And the beginning of 2022 for Toronto, then it really kind of flattens out and has stayed pretty flat. So we haven't seen much growth in terms of the number of businesses for around 6 months or so. And the Toronto figures have kind of now had the trajectory where they've come more or less come back to where the rest of Ontario is, but they had a more of a decline and a slower recovery, but now they're almost at the same level as the rest of Ontario. Okay. Um, but as I said, like the other thing they measure are business openings and business closings, and I wanted to get a net number. So I take the business openings and I subtract how many are closed. And this is for the rest of Ontario. So imagine like when COVID hit, you could see like the net number, there were 15,000 more closures than there were openings. 15,000 businesses. That's a huge number, right? Then you get this recovery where now the openings come back. But the trend line has actually been, we've got almost the same number of openings and closings as in each month. So we're not having a robust growing number of businesses is the story here. I also wanted to break out businesses in the tourism sector compared to everyone else. Again, this is rest of Ontario, number of active businesses. So tourism is the orange line and other businesses are the blue line. So when COVID hit, there was around a 12% drop in the number of active businesses in all other sectors. But in the tourism sector, it was a 25% drop. It really declined. And recovery took much longer. There always was a continuing gap and has just about closed. It's almost as if tourism has recovered. Okay, but my gosh, like it's been 3 or 4 years now. We're also able to show the figures by the size, number of employees. And so red is 1 to 4, green is 5 to 19, and orange is 20 more or more employees. So the bigger the business, the fewer they were. They really declined. It doesn't mean they all went out of business. A lot of firms that had more than 20 employees went to becoming 5 to 19 employees. A lot of firms that had 5 to 19 employees became 1 to 4 employees. So, we need to keep that in mind. But I think what's a bit worrisome is that the recovery in the larger businesses has stayed lower, as well as for the 5 to 19. It's the 1 to 4 businesses that are doing slightly better, okay, in terms of where the total number. So even when we're looking at, let's say, tourism and they're recovering, they may not have as many employees as before. Okay, so again, that's a worrisome if we're placing people into entry-level jobs in restaurants or retail. They've not only had a lower, like a weaker recovery, or it took them longer time to recover, but also the size of the establishment now has been affected. I don't know where to start on this. Okay, so this is Canadian Business Count. This is what we call kind of like the census of businesses. And we do this every year in Sherry's report. And so we compare the change in the number of businesses by industry and by number of employees. And so first of all, we show the total number that's available in the report, but we show the change between the current reporting, which is June 2024, and what it was in June 2023, and just show the numbers. So if it increased, we give it a green. If it decreased, we give it a minus. And this is the actual number of establishments in that category. So here where I'm pointing at this -2, that means there are 2 fewer establishments in mining and oil and gas extraction with 0 employees. So we can do it by size of employee, and then here's the total. And then we can total it up by year in each category. Isn't that cool? Okay, thank you, Sherry. That was meant for you. Um, so you can see kind of the pattern. You know, there's a lot of green. But where the orange is, it again is kind of worrisome that the orange shows up a lot in the category of 100 or more employees. So we're losing establishments. Again, not that they're closing. They may be moving down to the smaller category, but it still means less jobs available. And there are some areas like manufacturing where the net number has declined, or mining. And on the other hand, there are some areas where there's not only increases, but huge increases. But what does it mean? Like here, we got 1,049 increases in real estate and rental and leasing. Well, almost all of them are in the category of 0 employees. These are just landlords, like landlords who have a couple of units. So it's not, and they don't have any employees, but they're registered as a business and they pay HST. Okay. So, but overall, you know, during COVID, we did see this, you know, in terms of the total net numbers, we did see declines, but since then there were recoveries. But now again, we have a net decline of 18 firms with 100 or more employees in Simcoe in the last year. Okay, so now that your eyes have adjusted to being able to read this, we can show you the Muskoka figures. And here, you know, you can see there's more orange in these areas. First of all, you can see there's not as much change because there's you know, in truth, there's fewer firms in this category of 100 or more employees. The net change is 0, so you know, a decline in healthcare and social assistance. So probably a hospital perhaps, or a nursing home that went from this category to the slightly smaller category. But you know, retail trade minus 21. Accommodation food services, no, that's been growing, so that's good because you know, Muskoka depends on tourism, so that's a healthy sign. Arts, entertainment, and recreation also been, you know, overall net growth among employment. So we can look at this kind of data. Again, I'm not going to go through it line by line, but it's in the report, and so it's helpful just to show you what some of the trends are. The truth is, we're actually you can drill down incredibly. You can go down to what's called we can go down by town. We can go down even by postal code. So there's, you know, it's really helpful data. The only funny thing is that StatsCan says, no, don't make comparisons year to year. And one reason is that like sometimes how we collect the data may change. Well, so I guess I have to offer that caution, but we've shown this data for years. And it certainly kind of aligns with what we see happening in the labor force, right? Or in the economy, particularly, for example, COVID, right? The numbers went down. They recovered afterwards. We know tourism is down. So I think, I mean, StatsCan likes to be very rigorous, and that's great. But I think there's value to looking at these data. At least it's an extra piece of information that helps us understand what's happening. Taking that Canadian business count data, again, decided to compare tourism sector with all the other industries, or actually, sorry, called it core service sector. So the core service sector are accommodation, food services, arts, entertainment, recreation, retail, trade. Total number of businesses that were present, given a value of 100 in 2019. Actually, you know, the figure stayed flat pretty well, but the recovery or the growth in the proportion of businesses was much higher in all other industries and less in the core service sector, less in these sectors. In Muskoka, the core service sector did actually was doing well, COVID hits goes down, unlike in Simcoe, goes down, but has been recovery, and its recovery has been a bit more robust, and it's getting very close to where all the other industries are. Okay, I think this is the last data slide. We can look at how much is being brought in, receipts. And I like comparing full service restaurants to fast food operations because you have different employment mixes, right? Fast food is a lot of food counter attendants and cooks, whereas restaurants have servers and a mix of sometimes chefs and maitre d's and all that kind of stuff, hostesses. So it's a different mix of occupations. So full service restaurants are in blue, limited service. So those are the fast food operations are in orange. They were pretty close, but you can see the restaurants were the ones that were really hit at COVID. Their revenues went down. They weren't able to pivot as easily to curbside service, whereas the fast food businesses, that's their bread and butter. Well, not bread and butter. And every time we had a lockdown, remember, because we had more than one, maybe you don't remember. Anyway, it went down for the restaurants. And the gap is greater now. Okay, so the restaurants, again, haven't recovered as well as the fast food operations. Okay, so finally the recap. So I think I have 2 pages of recap. So unemployment rates, they stayed steady after COVID, but increased in 2024. Muskoka Kawartha has lower unemployment rates. I kept on singling out Muskoka Kawartha. So they are an older population. They have a lower participation rate. So they're going to have higher vacancy rates because they don't have the people. And as a result, their unemployment rate is lower because those people who might be unemployed are actually not in the labor force anymore. Okay, so participation rates did increase after COVID, but have now declined. And Muskoka has that much lower participation rate that we've laid out. Job vacancy rates, they've been declining since COVID. And Muskoka Kawartha has had higher job vacancy rates. Average offered wage has not gone up all that much once inflation is factored in. Also, the average depends on the mix of occupations, right? Those Q2 figures that we saw. And median income has been increasing slightly, but also, it in real terms, like in once, corrected for inflation, it declined in 2022, although some of it might be because of lower wage people coming back into the labor force. Net migration, well, all ages, but Simcoe especially 25 to 44, Muskoka especially 45 to 64-year-olds. Most of them come from the rest of Ontario. It took 2 years for the number of active businesses to return to pre-COVID levels, but in the last 2 years there's been almost no increase, and it took much longer for the tourism sector to recover, which is what those core service sectors were about.